It's time for the Double Stop with Brian Sword.
Welcome to the Double Stop. I'm Brian Sword, back with part 2 of my interview with producer Ian Little. There's not very much for me to say to set this one up, except that we're going to continue the interview that you heard in the last episode and finish out through the rest of his career. And I think this one should keep you pretty riveted because there is some unexpected turns. And then we find out about this really great project that he's putting together. So hope you stick around till the end and listen to that as well, because I think it's really cool. So let's get right to it. Here is part 2 of my interview with Ian Little.
I mean, everybody's going to know that I didn't cut it, that you know, I got this chance to work with the biggest band in the country and I messed it up. And I never would have got another gig again. I would have just been finished. And I pleaded with them to change their mind and they wouldn't. So I went to the band and the band were very sympathetic, but they said, listen, you know, we've got to follow the managers and EMI. They got us to where we are, la-di-da-di-da. Spoke to EMI, they were, completely unsympathetic. And then I went to Alex. Alex didn't know. And he said, what? That's mad. He said, as far as I can see, you're the 6th member of the band. I'm not doing it without you. And he basically told everybody, EMI, the Barrows, the band, the lot. He said, if you want me, you've got Ian. I'm not doing it without him. And that, I mean, what a guy. He's dead now, which is sad. But, I mean, he had no reason other than genuine sincerity and belief and love and whatever you call it. Because he could have taken all the money, all the kudos, everything, by just doing it on his own. He understood what it meant to me and my career and everything else, and he just said, no way, I'm not doing it. And yeah, it is, isn't it? I kind of well up just thinking about it. He was such a decent guy. He really was. I mean, he just had made millions anyway, but that wasn't the point. He was a workaholic. And that's the only sad thing about his death is he got killed while he was working in Compass Point, I think. He was driving back from a nightclub with the engineer in a Jeep. And there was a sharp corner that was well known. They weren't drunk or anything, but they went around this corner in the Jeep side of this cliff, and I think the engineer was survived, but Alex was put on to life support for a week, but then died. It was very sad, very sad. I always felt that he worked so hard and he never stopped to enjoy it. Do you know what I mean? He just kept going. One project after another, he just never stopped. But there you go, that's life, that's him. But yeah, that's what he did. And as it turned out, it was the right thing because the next part of the process was the writing of the songs for Seven and the Ragged Tiger. And as you know, they rented a chateau in the south of France. And somebody drove, it wasn't me, but someone drove the Rack 24-track mobile truck down there, and we parked it outside, and the band set up in the attic of the chateau, and then all these cables poured out of the window and came down into the truck and plugged it all in, and I had a 24-track and a pair of headphones and a mic and ran it at 15 IPS and just recorded everything they did. And whenever I heard anything that I felt was worthwhile, I would stop them and tell them to come down and listen to it. And I'd say, look, that's a really good little riff and the jam works, see if you can build something out of it. And they would try and do so. And, certain songs were built like that. And other songs were built in a very structured way. And one example I can give you is Union of the Snake. I mean, everybody loved Let's Dance, which had just come out, the David Bowie song. And I went through it and analysed it and realised that the bass drum pattern was actually quite complex, and I think it takes something like 8 bars before it repeats. It's not just a simple bump, 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 bump. It actually goes into a different loop. Anyway, it takes 8 bars to loop before it comes back to the beginning again. And so I learned it and programmed it onto the Lindrum, and I played it to the band and to Roger, and Roger thought it was great, and he learned it beat by beat until he got it off completely. And then the rest of the band started playing to it, and the end result was Union of the Snake, which is strange to think, but it was that bass drum that bump, 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 bump. You can hear it. You can, if you think about it, you can hear it. If you listen to the track, knowing that, you can hear that as the basis of it. That was where it grew from. But it's just one of the ways in which tracks are put together. There's dozens of them, but the thing about it, the reason I say it was the right decision is Alex couldn't have done that. He was too busy to spend 3 months in the south of France writing songs with them. He couldn't have done it. So, from that point of view, it was the right decision. And, I was happy to do it. Unfortunately, now, I never took any publishing, which, these days, in those days, publishing and mechanicals, which is the royalties you get from record sales, were roughly 50-50. So, you earned as much money from unit sales as you would have done from publishing. So very few producers saw the need to ask for publishing. But boy, I could have done, I could have asked for anything, 5%, maybe even 10% because of the input I put in, but I didn't. And there you go. I'd still be earning money from that album now, because every time the song is played on the radio, if you've got publishing, you get money. If it's played live every time, you get money. So, the number of concerts they do and the number of times the Reflex is played on the radio, it's, there you go. Such is life.
And did the recording of this album, did it go smooth for you?
No. We went from the south of France to Montserrat. Excuse me. Where Alex joined us, and we intended to start recording the real album there. And Alex was really disappointed in songs that we'd come up with, and I don't blame him, because there was only 2 or 3 that were really good, and the rest were just sort of mishmash. They weren't good, and I sort of knew that in my heart, and that, there's nothing I can do about it. They're playing, I'm not, and all I could do was, point out whenever they came up with a riff that was, or a jam that was worth trying to work on. And, once I'd done that, it was then down to their creativity and their sort of determination to knock a song out. And they didn't really. And as I say, apart from 2 or 3, the rest were just not that good. And so Alex was not happy and wanted to, rearrange and rewrite some of the stuff, and I agreed, and the band agreed, and so we started off by rewriting a lot of the songs, which, I don't know. What do you think of it as an album?
When it came out, it was my favorite Duran Duran album, and now as time has gone, I love the sounds, I love the experimentation. I think there are a handful of fantastic songs.
Yeah.
And then other ones are interesting experiments.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's what I brought to the band. I brought the weirdness. I mean, for example, for the Reflex, we flew down these backing vocalists from New York, 3 young black girls, and for the Reflex, the first thing I said to them was, go out there and sing like you were in a school playground. Just do da 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 da, and that's what it is. If you listen, you can hear them going da 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 da. And that was what I wanted. It was just unusual, and it's used again in the bridge, and the steel drums that are in there that are completely out of tune. That was my idea, was to try and create something that threw people, that didn't fit properly. And so those were the sort of things that I did to try and, first of all, to create a more distinct sound and a weirder sound, and to try and help them grow up. I didn't want to make another teeny bopper album. I wanted to make something that adults could listen to, or more grown-up people could listen to. So, hopefully from that perspective it works. And I know that not all the songs are great, but the ones that are worked, and the experimentation works. And I think that's what I'm most proud of.
Oh, I agree. I think the biggest mistake they could have done is to try to do a Rio Part 2.
Yeah.
Like, they had to evolve.
Yeah.
And, you look at, like, the Arcadia project that half the band did afterwards, they just took that weird and kept on running with it.
Yeah.
So definitely that became a permanent part of their sound,
Yeah.
was to try to be experimental.
Yeah.
I would imagine somebody like Nick must have loved it.
Yeah, Nick was brilliant. Nick and I think Nick and I were the closest. I was closer to Nick than anyone else, because we would spend hours poring over a synthesizer trying to get a sound we wanted. Neither of us were that expert at how you used a synth. I mean, I didn't understand ADSR in those days, and so I couldn't create envelopes that worked properly, and I couldn't create, I couldn't use oscillators to create, wah-wah sounds properly and things like that. So it was all very much experimentation. The thing about Arcadia is that, they never asked me to work on that for various reasons, but I think it lacks direction. It sort of lacks purpose. I think it is more experimentation, but I just think it's a sort of, what do you call it? It's not quite a demo, but it's not a finished album either. Would you agree with that or not?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting experiment, like there's some stuff in there that's cool.
Yeah.
I think it probably would have definitely used you on that one.
Yeah.
I think you may have guided the weirdness a little better.
Yeah. Weirdness has to be controlled. You can't just use it willy-nilly. You've got to be able to make it function properly within the track. The weirdness has to have a connection to the music. If it's just weirdness for the sake of weirdness, then you're going to end up with rubbish. You've got no sense of direction and no purpose to it. So I think that's really my biggest criticism of Arcadia, is it just lacks direction. It doesn't have any, kind of sense of purpose to it. But hey, that's life. I'd made a few mistakes on Seven and the Ragged Tiger, and they decided they weren't going to use me again. So such is life.
I don't want to downplay that album, because it's a classic album for that band for a reason. And it was a massive hit, and that's the album that broke them in America really large. So in terms of when you finished that album, were you satisfied? Were you happy with what it ended up being, especially going back to rework on some of those songs?
So listen, I can remember at the end we had gone through 2 deadlines, and in the end EMI rang up and said, listen, this 3rd deadline, if you don't make it, the album cannot be done before Christmas, because what they had to do in those days was they had to book out the pressing plant, and in order to get enough records, physical records in the shops, they needed to book out the pressing plant for 3 days solid, so that they could print up 500,000 or whatever it was copies to put in the record shops. And they said, if you don't make the 3rd deadline, we won't be able to do that in time for Christmas. And that is a no-no. That is just not going to happen. So whatever state you're in, you've got to bring it for the 3rd deadline. And I can remember Alex and I, we were working in 2 studios by then, each mixing a track, and we would swap over from each studio so that, Alex could rectify my mistakes and I could, check his work. There's very few mistakes on his work, but there were the odd thing where I thought, the levels weren't quite right. But between us, we got the tracks finished, and I can remember us working out the running order, putting it on a master tape and a copy of the master tape, and then going from the studio directly to the airport and onto a plane. And the next thing I remember is waking up on the floor of the cutting room in London, and the thing was being cut. That was the end of the project. That's how desperate it became. Now, you can say that, it all worked out fine, but it didn't. The truth is that there are tracks on that album that, to me, aren't finished and aren't right. And the fact that Niall had to do that remix of Rio really actually annoyed me, because he just made gimmicks. I mean, he used a sampler which, we could have got access to if we wanted to, but didn't see the point. And, he just, I respect it in a way, because it was unusual, and it sort of amplified the weirdness, if you like. He sort of made as much of the weirdness as he could, starting off with the girls singing and Simon's vocal pitched all over the place and stuff like that. But, I don't know. It's very difficult for me to say, because I was too close to it. But, the original that's on the album isn't right, but the remix that Niall did isn't right either, but it became a hit, so we can't argue with that. I don't know how many weeks it stayed at the top, but I don't think it was that many, and I think it could have been a bigger record than it was. But, that's just ifs and buts. so it's pointless to say. You know, he did his mix and it became a hit. I mean, the label didn't want to release it. They thought it was too much. They really did. He had the band and I think Alex and the managers had to really fight to get that mix released. Because the label in America thought it was too weird and didn't want to do it.
I think another thing you brought to the table that really helped that album's sound is Andy's guitar. It definitely, his tone-wise, it's more rockin'.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that? And is that sounds like something you would have probably contributed to?
Yeah, for sure. Because I just thought, well, if you look, listen, Andy was the only rock and roller in the band. Before he joined Duran, he had been in some sort of band, or maybe more than one, I don't know, that had toured Europe, going around military bases and going to clubs and doing, you know, he put in the legwork, which none of the others had done. And so Andy was unique in that he had this rock and roll history, that he'd been, you know, through the dirtiness of it, if you like. You know, he'd lived the life of a rock and roll guitarist. And, you know, I just felt that was something that we should use, that, you know, he had suppressed it, or Colin had suppressed it on Rio, and made the guitar just a melodic element, if you like. And that's not so much a criticism, it fitted his style. His overall style was very melodic and musical. But I felt that if we're going to use Andy's guitars, let's rock it up, you know. Let's let him be a rock and roll guitarist, and so that was my aim. You know, I left it to Andy very much to come up with the sounds that he wanted to use, and then just sort of use them within the track, and tried not to offend the others, because there was a reticence. It's funny that they didn't see themselves as a rock band, and so people like Nick and even Simon, less so Roger, but certainly Nick, you know, was like, what? You know, what are you doing? You know, you can't do that. He just didn't quite get it. It was too, too rocky for Nick. But I just felt that, you know, if you've got something there that's a raw talent, if you like, and waiting to come out, then let's use it. And I'm glad to say that I think that the guitar adds a character to the album, and certainly makes it more adult, certainly makes it more mature. So,
were you surprised that shortly thereafter that they kind of split into two different bands, or did you kind of see that coming from the making of this record?
Well, the truth of the matter is that I was older than the band, but younger than the Barrow brothers. And as a result, I became a little bit of a confidant to the band. They would come and talk to me. You know, we'd be in a hotel somewhere in New York or whatever, and Andy would come to my room and he would say, look, you know, the Barrow brothers are thinking of this or doing that. Do you think that's right? And I would, you know, give them advice as best I could about, I mean, at one point, I don't know if you know this, but at one point during the making of the album and the period immediately afterwards, I don't remember exactly the time frame, but the Barrow brothers just disappeared. And nobody knew where they were until we found out they were in South America and were going around the place by helicopter, ostensibly looking for locations for the new Duran Duran epic movie. Well, no one had thought of like doing what on earth are you talking about? It's like the idea of spending millions and millions of dollars on making a Duran Duran epic movie and having it placed in South America is just absurd. And they were obviously having a jolly. I mean, there's no doubt they were just having a very expensive holiday and on the band's expense. And I just said, look, this isn't right. And I think that planted the seed for them to seek, financial advice elsewhere. And there were certainly divisions within the band in terms of whether that was necessary or not. And I think from that perspective, I could envisage a split, but beyond that, no, I didn't really see any more signs, but I could well imagine a split occurring because of that, because of the way the Barrow brothers were carrying on. I mean, originally, Tritech, as I understand it, Tritech was set up as a 7-way equal split company. But the problem was that the Barrow brothers were also taking 20% off the top before the 7 divisions because they were the managers. Work that out. That whether that's true or not, I can't. I wouldn't sign an affidavit, but that's what I was told. Was that they were skimming 20% off the top as managers, and then the seven parts were divided up. So if that's true, that's appalling.
Now, in terms of the period to make this record, how long did it take then to start with basically nothing, write all the songs, rewrite the songs, then record, mix, and release?
About 9 months.
9 months.
Yeah.
Still starting with nothing, I don't know. Do you look at that as an extremely long, drawn-out process, or does that sound, pretty quick considering you started with nothing?
No, it's. I mean, look, we spent I don't know how many weeks in Montserrat, and that. I mean, one thing I haven't told you about the thing in Montserrat, which I'm going to put in the book, is when we got there, we started recording. You tune the first thing, you put a drum track down, and then you put a bass on it. Okay, so, and you put like a rhythm guitar, something like that, and you tune the bass up, and at the start of the song, it's in tune. By the time you get to the end, it's flat. Now, there's a problem. The first you think is that the guitar is the neck's bent, or there's something wrong with the screws or the heads or something like that. So you try it again, and the same thing happens. Then you try it with a guitar, and the same thing happens. And then you realize that what's happening is that the MCI, which are the worst machines in the world, but that's what they had, the MCI 24 track was not constant in its speed. That it was slowing down or speeding up, whatever it is, over the period of 3.5 minutes. The reason that Montserrat used MCI was because their office was near Miami. So it was the closest in terms of getting to Montserrat than any other. So we called the engineer, and the engineer came out, and he had his test equipment, and he tested it, and he said, no, it's fine. And we said, well, it's not. Whatever your machine is saying, it is going at a different speed after 3 minutes than it was at the beginning. And he checked it, and his machine said it wasn't. And so he left, and we were left with this machine, and we tried again, and the same bloody thing happened. It just went flat over 3.5 minutes. So we called them back, and I think in the end it took 3 visits before someone senior arrived and actually realized that there was a wheel that was out of sync, and that if you measured it before that wheel, it would look normal, but if you measured it after that wheel, you would see, and so he noticed, he said, yeah, there's a problem. And he resolved it, and from there on we were right. But we'd lost the best part of a week. I mean, we'd lost the best part of a week, and it kind of put a downer on the whole session, because you're nervous then. You're always looking for a problem. You're always sort of careful that there isn't a problem with the tuning, that you're making sure everything's in tune. And you know, it's hard to explain, but it spoilt the experience. I mean, it was great being on Montserrat. We had little mini mokes, and we used to drive up and down the roads, and I hit the front of the manager's car one day and had a really nice little accident. And yeah, it was good fun. I mean, you know, we had a really nice time there. It was a swimming pool and good food and everything else. But I think in terms of recording, no, you know, Elton John had been there before us, and I just don't. What can I say? I think we could have gone somewhere better. That's all. I'm not sure where, but I don't think it was. I mean, I had no say in the decision. Neither did Alex. I think the managers just worked out a deal with Air, who owned the studio. You know, they had Air in London and Air in Montserrat, and I think they worked out a deal with Air that, you know, we could go to Montserrat for a relatively good price, and that was done deal. But you know, I mean, the thing about it was that we did realise that at the end of the time, or towards the end of the time at Montserrat, this is a crazy story, you'll love this. We realised that we needed to record the end and mix the album in a city, because otherwise it would sound too, you know, rural and soft. We were kind of living out of touch with the real world because we were in paradise. So, you know, we needed to go to a city to finish off the mix and the recording. So they sent me on a trip to France, because we couldn't go to England because of tax reasons. We couldn't go to America because of union reasons. So it was down to Europe, Asia, and Australia. And we thought, okay, there's some good studios in France, in Paris. Ian, why don't you go to Paris? Okay, I'll go to Paris. Now, I went to Paris and back in 24 hours. Can you believe that? I flew from Montserrat to Miami, from Miami to New York, from New York to Paris, went round the studios, didn't think much of any of them, got the plane back to New York, missed my connection, so I had no money or credit cards on me, so I rang up the Carlisle Hotel, which is very, very plush and expensive. It's where Brian Ferry always stays. And I'd stayed there with Nick because he thought staying at the same hotel as Brian Ferry, that's another story. But we had to be interviewed by the manager before they'd accept us. There's me, Nick, and Andy. We had to be interviewed by the manager, and he sort of said, we're not used to having people of your ilk in our studio, in our hotel. And, you know, we're concerned. the fabrics are very delicate and, all this stuff. And he said, and anyway, the only available room is the suite on the 28th floor, which is $4,000 a night. And Andy just said, we'll have it. Just like that. no sort of hesitation. And this bloke was just gobsmacked. There's nothing he could do. I mean, he said it was $4,000 a night, and Andy said, we'll have it. That was it. So we were shown up to this hotel. Anyway, later, that was when we were there on a 5-day holiday. When I arrived at New York after this mammoth journey, and I was so messed up with jet lag, having gone, 24 hours to Paris and back again, finding I'd missed my connection, had no money or anything. So I just rang up the Carlisle and said, look, I need to stay. Credit it to the Barrow brothers, to Tritech. You've got their details. You can ring them up in Montserrat if you want to. And I just got a limousine from the airport to the Carlisle and stayed there for the night. Oh my God. Talk about the high life. And then flew back to Montserrat the next day and said, no, they're all rubbish. So we sat down, and this is the gospel truth, we sat down and we said, where is the place that is farthest away from London? And the reason we did that was because all the A&R people and all the marketing people from London, if we were close to them, they would constantly be coming in to say, how's it going? Let's have a listen. And we thought, where can we go where they can't do that? Sydney. And that is literally the only reason we went to Sydney. I swear to you. We didn't know the studio. We didn't know if it was any good or not. But we did know that the staff from EMI wouldn't be able to get there. So we went to Sydney to finish the album.
Amazing. Okay.
Yeah.
You've been unbelievably generous with your time, but there is still a few more things I want to touch upon.
Go on, fire away.
Okay, so basically, the album comes out and it does really well. Now, although you didn't return for more work with Duran, where did you go from there after that album?
Well, what I did from there was I started. There'd been a lot of talk within the industry that I had landed on my feet, that I had got this gig, and that I didn't have any prior track record apart from my work on Avalon. So I was determined to try and break a new band, and the closest I came was with the Louis Hum, which you may or not have heard of, but we did a song called Imagination, which I thought was a good song and a hit, and it almost made it. I think it got to number 40, and it was later used as an ad for Barclays Bank, but it never really sort of, the Louis Hum, it was one guy, and he never really made it. He sounded a bit too much like David Bowie. And I did other things. I did other projects. But the truth is, Brian, that I then got into drugs. And unfortunately, that put an end to things, because by 1986, I was made bankrupt. And all the money that I'd earned from Duran had been spent. I'd bought a house, beautiful place that was being built. It was inside a Victorian orphanage. I'd bought an empty shell, and you had to then sort of get a plan together to do the interior, which I'd done with the architects that I used to work for, and it was a beautiful place, and I got it and I lived in it. And I think I probably lived in it for about a year and a half, and then the bankruptcy happened and I lost it along with everything else. So, that I'm just being totally honest with you. That's what happened. As I became foul to addiction, and it took me a while. I had a girlfriend who lived in New York, and I went into rehab in 1988, I think. 1980, Duran were bringing the decade out, and I knew that because I had 4 tracks on it, it was a vinyl album, that I was going to get a decent sized check in March because it was coming out of Christmas. So I thought, if I carry on as I am, I'll just get the money and I'll spend it all on drugs and I'll be broke again. But if I get clean, there's a chance of me rebuilding my life. So this girl in America offered for me to stay with her and started writing me letters, and I went into rehab, and I used to play stupid games with myself. I used to say, right, if I don't get a letter from her today, I'm going to walk out of here. And sure enough, there'd be a letter. Amazing, eh?
Yeah.
And that went on for 8 weeks. And every time I thought of that, a letter would arrive. She was just amazing. So at the end of the period, I came out clean, confident, and I bought myself some new clothes and whatever. I waited till March, and I got my royalty check, and I got myself spruced up a little bit and got on the plane and went to New York. And I had 3.5 years. I set up a business with an American guy. The idea was that computer recording was just in its infancy. Recording onto a hard drive, like Pro Tools, and I think it was, what was it called? Designer or something, the very first one. Do you remember?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Something like that. Anyway, we had a computer with that, and I got a partner who was an American guy who was dead straight. He lived with his parents. He'd made his money out of backing a R&B record that had gone top 10 in the Billboard dance chart, and he'd made about $250,000 out of it. I had about 60,000, and so he matched my investment, which meant we had $120,000, and that was enough to rent a really nice apartment in Red Square. Do you know New York?
I don't know.
No, okay. Well, Red Square was a new apartment on Houston, which is right at the bottom of the Lower East Side, and it was on the 11th floor. It was fantastic, huge, great place. And we started working there, and we started getting clients. One of our first clients was a stockbroker who used to spend every spare dollar he got on equipment, but he didn't have a clue how to make a good bass drum sound. So he was a perfect client. That was the sort of people that we wanted, that we could then teach how to use their equipment and help them progress. Maybe a little bit restricted as a business plan, but it was a start. The idea was that if we could make enough a go of it and make enough money out of it, then we could set up a proper studio. That was, I think, the plan, really. And of course, Stephanie and I were completely in love with each other, and so I was happy as Larry. And then what happened was that in a week It sounds hard to believe when I think of it now, but it's the truth. I started to, basically, Stephanie used to get ill, and she'd say, "Oh, I'm going to go to the hospital." I'd say, "Well, I'll come with you." She'd say, "No, I'll just go on my own." And it turned out that she was going to Central Park and sitting there for 3 hours and then coming home. And she'd say, "Oh, I've got a bladder infection." Okay. This went on for a year until it became apparent there was a lot more wrong with her than a bladder infection. And her mother, I called her mother, and she came down to New York from Philly and took Stephanie back to Philly and took her to her doctor, who immediately discovered that she had cervical cancer and that it was really spread everywhere because she hadn't done anything about it. And they put her into hospital in Philadelphia. And so what I was doing was every weekend I'd go down to Philly and see her, and she was just deteriorating at a rate of knots. And the last time, cut a long story short, the last time I went, I knew it was the last time I'd see her, and I stayed for 4 days. And she didn't die then, but I left and came back to New York, and I walked into the door, and the place was empty. And I thought, hang on, I must have the wrong flat. So I closed the door, and then I looked at the number, and I looked at my key, and I thought, no, this is the right flat. So I opened the door again, and it was totally empty. And the scumbag that I was partner with had cleaned me out for everything. And I immediately rang up the bank, and he cleaned out our business account, which had about $35,000 in it. And I was left with $1,200, I think, something like that. And the truth is that I stayed there and I became homeless because something in my mind, I went a little bit mad, Brian. I went a little bit mad, and I believed that if I stayed in New York, Stephanie would come back again. And if I went back to London, it was all over.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It was like that was the end of it. And so I became homeless, and I learned how to live on the streets in New York. It's quite funny, really. I mean, I'd stayed in 5-star hotels in New York, the best ones. I'd driven around in limos, and now I was sleeping on stoops under cardboard. And it's quite a change. But it's quite liberating at the same time. I mean, I learned an awful lot about myself and about life. I mean, you if you've got nothing to lose, you've got a freedom about you because, well, what can anyone take off you? Nothing.
Yeah, that's right.
You get up every morning. I eventually found out about these places called flop houses. I don't know if you know about them, but they're down in the Bowery, which is a part of New York. It's pretty grim. And what they do is they convert the floor of a warehouse into a series of cubicles. And because of the fact that air wouldn't reach them, the walls stop about 3 foot short of the ceiling. And so they put a wire mesh over the top so you can't climb from one to the other. And the cubicle is as big as a single bed with a foot down the side and a cupboard. That's it. And some people had lived there for so long, they'd put televisions in there and sort of make all sorts of things that just sort of made it more like a home, but I couldn't understand it, and I just sort of stayed there. And 8 o'clock in the morning, you'd have to get out, and that was the end of it. $12 a night.
Right.
So I used to go out, in the snow. It was during the winter when I started. Holes in my feet, so within 10 seconds I had frozen feet. And I realized something about people, that if you are desperate and show it, then people will give you a really wide berth. I could go up to people saying, please, please help me. I need something, you know. They'll just give you a wide berth. If you're all happy, saying, hey, what a great day. Listen, I need some money because I've got to get somewhere something to eat and somewhere to live. What do you reckon? Can you help me? Or, you know, you come up with a line or whatever, and people throw money at you. It's ridiculous. It's the psychology of it. They don't want to face up to the reality that someone can be that desperate. But if you act like you're all happy and everything's hunky-dory, then they'll help you out. Very strange.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But there you go. So that was my low side. That was what I did in it's strange, isn't it? Going from one extreme to the other. But then eventually I got a ticket back to London and, restarted my life, and here I am.
Now, that leads to your current project, which I think is really quite interesting, what you're trying to put together. So can you tell me about what you're trying to put together now?
Yeah, surely. So it started off with the Music Outreach Project, MOP. I had this idea several years ago that if you could use a computer-based system using something like Logic, you could demystify the process whereby tracks are produced by computer these days, and show kids that the way that their idols, people like Tiny Temper and Stormzy, I don't know if you've heard of these guys, but they're big in England. They're grime artists and hip-hop and rap people. I don't know who's big in America, but these guys are big over here. The thing is that Stormzy, for example, who is a grime artist, he came out of one of these sort of council estates, and that's where the problems are. And so what I wanted to do was to demystify the process, to show these young people that they have got choices, that if they learn how to make music, if you demystify music and show them how easy it is to create a piece of music, then you also open up pathways into other creative arts. You can say, listen, if you're not musical, maybe you could do video, or maybe you could do graphic design, maybe you could do fashion design, illustration, packaging. That London is known as a centre for the creative arts. And so there's thousands of jobs out there waiting for creative people to start doing them. Because the premise that I started with was that a lot of people, they leave school and they've got no academic qualifications, but they may well have creative spirits. And that creative spirits has never been encouraged or inspired or in any way nurtured during their time at school. I mean, it's very very rarely recognized, let alone encouraged. And so these people, they've got this creative spirit, but they've never been shown any opportunity where it's got worth. You know, they don't see that creative nature as having any value or any worth. And I thought, well, if you start this music project, you can show them that it does have worth and it does have value. And if you can start putting musical ideas together or maybe video the process, then you can get into it. And the idea I had was to create a portable computer-based system. So you've got like an iMac with a 27-inch screen, and then you've got a keyboard controller. You've got something like the Native Instruments machine, which is the drum controller with all the pads on. And so what you've got, and then you've got a couple of microphones, and so you've got 3 or 4 ways in which people can interact. And that was the most important thing. And then just let them get at it. So, okay, let's start with Logic. Let's put down a click. Let's put down a basic loop beat. And then you start adding to that. And just add what you want. I said there's 2 ways you could approach it. One would be that you have a little chat and then you come to a consensus of what is their favorite track right now. What are they all listening to right now? And you take that track and you break it down. You analyze it and work out, what are the parts? What's the kick drum doing? What's the snare doing? What's the bass doing? And build the track up. So it's not going to sound exactly like it, but it's a facsimile of it. And they can then understand it, So that way they get to really get an insight into the way that the tracks are put together. Obviously, it's a limited system, and you explain that to them that, there's more complex systems that you use to get better sounds and more subtlety into it. But in essence, what you've done is created that track. And that then gives them a sense of, first of all, it gives them a sense of ownership. It gives them a sense of self-worth. It gives them a sense of direction. And it gives them choices. And it creates opportunities for them to create chances and whatever. And with hard work, possibly even leading to work. But it gives them choices, opportunity, and hope, and they're the 3 most fundamental things. So I wanted to create this project, and I went to the NHS. They loved it. They went over the top. They thought it was amazing. And I spent 9 months becoming an NHS volunteer so I'd be capable of delivering the system. And then they turned around and said they couldn't find the money for it. So I was completely deflated. I mean, that was 2016. I just felt completely and utterly deflated. It was like the wind taken out of my sails completely. And it took me a while before I got back to thinking, how else can I fund this? How else can I get this thing off the ground? And that's when I thought of the Duran thing, that if I could find enough Duran fans and write a book that they'd be happy to pay for, then maybe I could show, that I could raise enough money that my idea was I've been in touch with my local MP, which is a member of parliament, like a congressman or something, and they have promised, I've done a synopsis of my proposal, and she's promised to get that to the Mayor of London and try and arrange a meeting with either him or one of his team to try and see what can be done. And I thought, if I could raise X amount of money from the Duran community, I could go to him and say, look, the Duran fans are people that care, and they've raised X amount of money. I want you to at least match it. And that was my idea. The other thing I wanted to say just about the Music Outreach Project, the MOP, is that there is a synopsis of my proposal that I have sent out to everybody, and that they need to read it again and to really understand it. And if there's anybody that didn't get that synopsis, let me know, because I'll send it to them.
Okay, that was my interview with Ian Little. Now, if you want to find out more about his music outreach project, there is a Facebook group. So if you look Ian Little Music Outreach Project, if you do a search for that, you'll find it and you can join the group and keep up to date. That is also where you can contact him if you want to get a copy of that outline that he talked about at the end of the interview. All right, that's it for another episode. I hope you enjoyed it. And until next time, I'm Brian Sword. Thanks for listening.